The airfield stretched out like a concrete desert under the blazing afternoon sun. But Sophia Morgan knew she'd be serving coffee again instead of touching the controls she craved. She adjusted her waitress apron, the one with coffee stains that wouldn't wash out, and glanced through the diner window at the military jets parked on the tarmac for the third time that hour. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Inside the Desert Skies Diner, just outside Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, Sophia carried a pot of coffee with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it for years. The pilots who frequented the place barely looked up as she refilled their cups, too absorbed in their technical discussions about the F-22 Raptors they flew daily. They never noticed how her eyes lingered on their flight manuals, how she tilted her head slightly when they discussed aerodynamics, or how she sometimes mouthed the acronyms along with them. "More coffee, hotshot?" she asked Major Derek Reynolds, the squadron's newest hotshot pilot who always sat with his back to the window. "Yeah, thanks," he replied without looking up from his tablet, where he was reviewing flight patterns for an upcoming exercise. "And maybe stop hovering? It's distracting." Sophia poured his coffee silently, fighting the urge to point out that his approach vector calculations were off by 3 degrees. She'd spotted the error immediately, but waitresses didn't correct Air Force pilots, especially not waitresses who'd never even sat in a real cockpit. At 32, Sophia had spent more hours in flight simulators than most pilots, but always in her tiny apartment, always alone. The sophisticated flight simulator rig she'd built from secondhand parts and countless hours of coding was her secret, just like the worn flight manuals hidden beneath her bed and the aerospace engineering textbooks stacked in her closet. "Did you hear about the glitch they found in the F-22's landing system?" one of the pilots asked Reynolds, lowering his voice though not enough for Sophia to miss it. "Software update coming next month," Reynolds responded with a dismissive wave. "Nothing to worry about." Sophia's hand tightened around the coffee pot. She'd read about that glitch on an aviation forum 3 months ago, a potentially dangerous flaw in how the aircraft's computer handled crosswind calculations during landing. The software patch was temporary at best, ignoring the fundamental issue with the sensor alignment. Back behind the counter, Manny, the diner's owner and cook, nodded toward the pilots. "They tipping well today?" "Same as always," Sophia replied, placing the coffee pot on the warmer. "They think the coffee appears by magic," Manny chuckled. "You ever gonna tell them about your little hobby?" He was the only one who knew about her simulator, having stumbled upon her apartment when delivering soup during a bout of flu last winter. Instead of laughing, he'd been impressed, asking questions that revealed his own past as a Vietnam-era. "And have them laugh me out of town? No thanks." Sophia wiped down the counter. "Besides, it's just a hobby." But they both knew it was more than that. Sophia had been obsessed with flight since childhood, when her father, a cargo pilot, would sneak her into empty cockpits. His death in a storm over the Pacific had ended her formal proximity to aviation, leaving her mother too broke and too afraid to support a daughter's expensive dreams of flight school. So Sophia had found other ways: online courses, secondhand manuals, simulation software. Forums where retired pilots discussed technical details. 15 years of self-education had given her knowledge that rivaled trained pilots, but without credentials. It remained invisible as she was to the men she served coffee to every day. The bell above the door chimed as Colonel Marcus Harrington entered, his stern presence immediately commanding the room's attention. The pilot straightened, conversations halting mid-sentence. "At ease," he said, though his tone suggested anything but. He nodded toward an empty booth. "Reynolds, Freeman, join me." Sophia moved to serve them, order pad ready. "Just coffee," Harrington said without looking at her. "We have matters to discuss." She filled 3 cups, straining to catch their conversation as she moved away. Something about an upcoming demonstration for Pentagon officials, complicated by unexpected maintenance issues. 3 of our birds are grounded, Harrington said, his frustration evident. We need all 6 Raptors operational by tomorrow. What about the backup plan? Freeman asked. There is no backup plan, Harrington replied. Either we get those jets in the air, or the funding goes to Edwards. Sophia returned to the counter, where a new customer had taken a seat. Grace Chun, one of the base's civilian mechanics. Unlike the pilots, Grace always acknowledged Sophia, perhaps recognizing another woman in a male-dominated space. Rough day? Sophia asked, placing a menu before her. Grace sighed. You have no idea. One of the F-22s has a landing gear issue nobody can solve. The diagnostic computer shows nothing wrong, but the test pilot swears the right strut feels unstable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Have you checked the hydraulic bypass valve? Sophia asked automatically, then immediately regretted it when Grace's eyebrows shot up. How do you know about bypass valves? Sophia shrugged, feeling heat rise to her. Cheeks, my dad was a pilot. You pick things up. Grace studied her with newfound interest. The bypass valve was the first thing we checked. It's something else. Something intermittent. Sophia wanted to suggest checking the calibration on the weight distribution sensors, a common cause of phantom landing gear issues, but bit her tongue. She'd already said too much. Throughout the afternoon, more base personnel filtered through the diner, conversations buzzing with tension about tomorrow's demonstration. Sophia moved between tables, collecting snippets about the grounded jets. The pressure from Washington, the careers hanging in the balance. As her shift wound down, Colonel Harrington returned, alone this time, looking more haggard than before. He took a corner booth and ordered coffee and pie, then spread maintenance reports across the table. Refill? Sophia asked 20 minutes later, approaching with the pot. Harrington glanced up, noticing her for perhaps the first time. Yes. His eyes returned to the reports, then suddenly back to her. You're here every day. It wasn't a question, but Sophia nodded anyway. Do you ever hear the pilots talk about their aircraft? Any complaints? Observations? The question surprised her. They talk about the crosswind handling, she said. Carefully, especially since the software update last spring. Some think it's overcorrecting. Harrington's eyes narrowed. What else? Lieutenant Rodriguez mentions vibration during vertical climbs. Major Freeman complains about sensor lag in his heads-up display. She paused. And they all think the maintenance crews over-tighten the cockpit harnesses. A slight smile touched Harrington's lips, observant. It's my job to pay attention. To coffee preferences, perhaps. He studied her. You seem to know aircraft terminology. Sophia felt suddenly exposed. My father was a pilot. Was? He died. Pacific Storm. Ca-130 cargo transport. The words came out clipped, rehearsed from years of minimizing the pain. Harrington nodded slowly. I'm sorry. He gathered his reports. Thank you for the coffee, Ms. Morgan, Sophia Morgan. Morgan. He left a generous tip and walked out. After closing, Sophia cleaned the diner with practiced efficiency, her mind still on the pilots' conversations. The grounded F-22s bothered her, not just the fact of them, but the specific issues described. The landing gear problem Grace had mentioned sounded like a calibration issue in the weight distribution sensors, but it could also be interference in the electronic control system. Without realizing it, she'd begun sketching diagrams on the back of an order ticket, mapping potential failure points. You should show them, Manny said, appearing behind her. Sophia crumpled the paper. Show who what? Those pilots. Your knowledge. He nodded toward the crumpled ticket. You know more than half those hotshots. they wouldn't listen to a waitress. Maybe not, Manny shrugged. But if you never try, nothing changes. Sophia's apartment was small but meticulously organized. One corner held her pride and joy, a custom flight simulator built from salvaged parts and modified gaming equipment. 3 monitors arranged in an arc displayed a startlingly realistic cockpit view, while a 4th showed technical readouts. The joystick and throttle were professional grade, purchased second-hand from a retired commercial pilot. She settled into her chair and began the startup sequence for an F-22 simulation. Her fingers moved with practiced precision over the controls as the virtual jet came to life around her. This wasn't some simplified video game. She'd programmed this simulator herself, incorporating real aerodynamic models and technical specifications gleaned from forums, manuals, and hundreds of hours of research. Tonight, she wasn't just flying, she was troubleshooting. She ran the F-22 through landing sequences with various failure scenarios, testing her theory about the weight distribution sensors. After the 3rd simulation, she was convinced if the primary and secondary sensors fell out of calibration with each other, the system would show green while the aircraft would feel unstable to the pilot. The solution was relatively simple: recalibrating both sensors simultaneously rather than sequentially, which was standard procedure. But without credentials, without access, her knowledge remained theoretical, confined to her apartment, as useless as knowing how to sail a ship while stranded in a desert. Her phone buzzed with a text from Manny. News says big demonstration tomorrow. Important people coming. Busy morning ahead. Sophia set down her phone and ran one more simulation, this time with a more severe failure scenario: complete hydraulic loss during landing. Her hands moved with confidence through the emergency protocols, bringing the virtual aircraft down safely despite the catastrophic failure. If only real life offered such clear pathways to proving oneself. Morning brought a diner full of tense military personnel. The demonstration was hours away, and the mood was grim. Only 4 of the 6 required F-22s were operational, with 2 stubbornly grounded despite overnight efforts. More coffee, Colonel? Sophia approached Harrington's table, where he sat with 2 men in expensive suits, the Pentagon officials. She presumed. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. He gestured to his companions. This is Assistant Secretary Davis and General Whitmore from Washington. Sophia nodded politely, surprised by the introduction. Waitresses were usually invisible to such men. Colonel Harrington mentioned you yesterday, Davis said, studying her with mild curiosity. Said you have an ear for aircraft issues. Heat rushed to Sophia's face. I just listened to the pilots talk, sir, and understand what they're saying, apparently. General Whitmore's tone held a note of skepticism. Unusual for a civilian, Harrington interjected smoothly. Yes, it is. Sophia refilled their cups and retreated, unsettled by the exchange. Throughout the morning, she caught Harrington watching her with a contemplative expression. The diner had begun to empty as personnel headed to the airfield for final preparations when Grace Chun burst through the door, her face flushed with urgency. Colonel, we have a situation. She rushed to Harrington's table. Reynolds' jet just returned from the test flight with multiple system failures. He managed to land, but that leaves us with only 3 operational aircraft. The Pentagon officials exchanged glances. Davis leaned forward. That's unacceptable, Colonel. The demonstration requires a minimum of 4 aircraft to execute the maneuvers properly. We're working on it, sir, Harrington replied, his calm voice belying the tension evident in his posture. Grace shook her head. The maintenance crew can't identify the problem. Reynolds says the aircraft started experiencing anomalies during a high G-turn. Multiple systems flickering, then stabilizing, then flickering again. Power distribution, Sophia murmured, then froze when she realized she'd spoken aloud. All eyes turned to her. What did you say? Harrington asked. Sophia swallowed hard. It sounds like a power distribution issue. Maybe the main bus is experiencing intermittent connectivity failures under stress. The table fell silent. General Whitmer's eyebrows drew together. And you would know this how exactly? Sophia hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. I've studied aircraft systems, as a hobby. A hobby, Whitmore repeated flatly. Grace frowned thoughtfully. Actually, that makes sense. The pattern of systems failing matches with what would happen during a main bus fluctuation. We didn't consider that because the diagnostics show clean power flow. The diagnostics only check at rest, Sophia said, the words tumbling out now. You need to test under load, with specific attention to the connection points. The silence that followed was deafening. Davis looked incredulous, Whitmore skeptical, and Harrington calculating. Ms. Morgan, Harrington said finally, would you be willing to come to the base and look at the aircraft? The question hit her like a physical force. After 15 years of watching from the sidelines, someone was actually asking for her input. I'm not authorized. I can authorize a civilian consultant for emergency purposes, Harrington interrupted. The question is, are you willing? Sophia looked down at her waitress uniform, then at the expectant faces around the table. Yes, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'd need to see the maintenance logs first, and the recent flight data. Harrington nodded to Grace. Make it happen. 20 minutes later, Sophia found herself walking across the tarmac. Toward a hangar, her waitress uniform exchanged for borrowed coveralls, her order pad replaced by a tablet displaying technical readouts. Harrington walked beside her, his pace brisk. Your file says you never completed high school, he said without preamble. So he'd looked her up. My mother got sick. I had to work. Yet you understand complex aircraft systems. I taught myself. Online courses, forums, simulations, manuals I could find. Why? The question was direct, his gaze piercing. Sophia hesitated, then decided on honesty. Because I've wanted to fly since I was 8 years old. When that wasn't possible, I settled for understanding how flight works. They reached the hangar where Reynolds' F-22 sat surrounded by maintenance personnel. The sleek, angular aircraft looked predatory even at rest, its stealth design hinting at lethal capabilities. Make a hole, Harrington called, and the technicians parted, their expressions changing from curiosity to confusion when they saw Sophia. Grace Chun approached, carrying a maintenance tablet. I've uploaded all the logs and flight data, she said, handing it to Sophia. The chief mechanic thinks you're crazy, by the way. Probably, Sophia murmured, already absorbed in the data. The readouts confirmed her suspicion. Under high G loads, multiple systems experienced momentary power fluctuations. The pattern suggested a physical connection issue rather than an electronic one. She approached the aircraft, running her hand along the fuselage almost reverently. I need to see the main power bus access panel, she said. A mechanic scoffed. Ma'am, with all due respect, that's inside the airframe. We'd need to remove. There's an inspection port under the right avionics bay, Sophia interrupted. Section 47A in the maintenance manual. The hangar fell silent. The mechanic stared at her, then at Harrington, who nodded. Show her. With the inspection port opened, Sophia lay on her back and slid underneath, a flashlight between her teeth. She'd seen this configuration 1,000 times in diagrams, but never in person. The reality was both familiar and overwhelming. Her heart raced as she examined the connections, her fingertips tracing wiring harnesses. There, she said, pointing to a seemingly secure connector. This connection point is making intermittent contact under stress. The locking mechanism is worn. The chief mechanic joined her under the aircraft, examining the connector with a skeptical expression that slowly changed to surprise. She's right. The lock tab is worn down. It would allow movement during high-G maneuvers. Can you fix it? Harrington asked from above. Yes, sir. 30 minutes. As they emerged from under the aircraft, Sophia found herself surrounded by a mix of curious and skeptical faces. Reynolds, the pilot who had experienced the failure, pushed through the crowd. You're the waitress, he said, recognition dawning. The one who's always listening. Sophia met his gaze evenly. Yes. How did you know about the connector? Because I've studied every inch of this aircraft's systems for years. Because when you and your friends talk about flying, I actually listen. Because being a waitress doesn't mean I can't understand aeronautics. Reynolds blinked, taken aback by her directness. Harrington checked his watch. If this fix works, we'll have 4 aircraft for the demonstration. We're still short 2 for the full display. What about the landing gear issue on the 5th aircraft? Sophia asked. Grace nodded, still grounded. Test pilot refuses to fly it, says it feels like the right strut will collapse on landing. I'd like to see it, Sophia said. The 5th F-22 sat in a separate hangar, its landing gear deployed for inspection. Sophia walked around it slowly, studying the symmetry of the struts, the hydraulic lines, the electronic connections. The diagnostic system shows nothing wrong, Grace explained. We've replaced the hydraulic cylinder, the control module, even the strut itself. Still feels wrong to the pilot. Sophia knelt beside the right landing gear, running her hands along the components. What's the pilot's name? Captain Martinez, Harrington supplied. One of our best. And he specifically says it feels unstable during landing, not takeoff? Correct. Sophia stood, thinking. I need to see the weight distribution sensors and their calibration data. Grace pulled up the information on her tablet. The readouts showed both sensors in perfect alignment, yet Martinez insisted the aircraft felt imbalanced during landing. The problem, Sophia said slowly, is that they're too perfectly aligned. How can perfect alignment be a problem? The chief mechanic demanded. Because in real-world conditions, perfect doesn't exist. These readings show identical values across all test conditions. That's statistically impossible, unless one sensor is echoing the other's data. Instead of providing independent readings, Grace finished, understanding dawning. A software error. Exactly. The system thinks it has 2 sensors providing balanced readings, but actually, it's the same data duplicated. During landing, when the right strut compresses differently than expected, there's no independent verification. The chief mechanic looked skeptical but consulted his own tablet. After several minutes of examining the data, his expression changed. I'll be damned. The secondary sensor is in a feedback loop with the primary. Can you fix it before the demonstration? Harrington asked. We need to reset the calibration and force each sensor to report independently. Yes, it's doable. As they worked, word spread through the base about the waitress who was solving problems that had stumped military technicians. Sophia felt both exhilarated and uncomfortable under the attention, keeping her focus on the aircraft systems rather than the whispers around her. By noon, both repairs had proven successful. Reynolds' F-22 passed a high-G test flight with no power fluctuations, and the landing gear on the 5th aircraft was responding properly with independent sensor readings. 5 aircraft, Harrington announced to the Pentagon officials who had arrived to observe the progress. 1 short of our target, but enough to proceed with a modified demonstration. Secretary Davis nodded, eyeing Sophia with newfound respect. Impressive troubleshooting, Ms. Morgan. Where did you receive your training? My apartment, sir. Flight simulators, technical manuals, and online forums. Davis raised an eyebrow. Unconventional, but effective, Harrington added. As the maintenance crews prepared the aircraft for the afternoon demonstration, Sophia found herself at a strange threshold, allowed onto the base, her knowledge validated, yet still an outsider. She would return to the diner tomorrow, serving coffee to pilots who might view her differently now, but who would still fly while she remained grounded. The thought settled like a weight in her chest. She stood near the hangar entrance, watching the activity on the tarmac, feeling the familiar ache of being so close to flight, yet forever separated from it. Ms. Morgan. Harrington approached, his expression unreadable. We still have a problem. The 6th aircraft? No, Captain Martinez, Sophia frowned. I thought we fixed his landing gear issue. We did. But he was injured during a physical training exercise an hour ago. Broken wrist. He can't fly. That leaves you with 5 pilots for 5 aircraft, Sophia said, not understanding the problem. No, Harrington corrected. The demonstration requires all 6 aircraft. We were going to have Reynolds fly the repaired jet after his regular demonstration duties, but with the tight schedule, he paused, studying her. How good is your simulation experience, exactly? Sophia stared at Harrington, her mind racing to process his implication. Sir, if you're suggesting what I think you are, I'm not suggesting anything yet, Harrington replied, his voice lowered. I'm asking about your simulation experience. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Over 5,000 hours in military aircraft simulators, primarily 5th-generation fighters. Around 2,000 specifically in F-22 simulations with realistic systems modeling. Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly. That's more than some of our pilots. It's different in a real aircraft, Sophia acknowledged, trying to keep her voice steady. Despite the adrenaline flooding her system, the G-forces, the vibrations, the sensory input, you can't fully simulate those. No, he agreed, but the fundamentals remain the same. A senior officer approached, interrupting their conversation. Colonel, we have another problem. The 6th aircraft has a cracked canopy seal. Maintenance says it can't be properly repaired. Before the demonstration, Harrington's jaw tightened. Are you certain? Yes, sir. It would compromise cabin pressure at demonstration altitudes. Then we're down to 5 aircraft. Harrington sighed, running a hand through his close-cropped hair. We'll need to modify the demonstration profile again. The officer nodded and departed, leaving Sophia and Harrington alone again. Sophia could feel the weight of the moment. The demonstration was crucial for funding. Careers hung in the balance, and she stood at an unexpected crossroads. Ms. Morgan, Harrington said finally, thank you for your assistance today. You've helped save this demonstration from complete failure. She recognized a dismissal when she heard one. Happy to help, Colonel. Sophia turned to leave, feeling a complex mix of pride and disappointment. For a brief moment, she thought Harrington might actually be considering letting her. But no, that would be impossible, irresponsible. She was a waitress with self-taught knowledge, not a trained military pilot. Ms. Morgan, Harrington called after her, one more thing. She turned back. How would you feel about sitting in an actual F-22 cockpit? Not flying, he clarified quickly. Just to compare it to your simulation. Something in his expression made her pulse quicken. I'd like that very much, sir. 20 minutes later, Sophia found herself climbing the ladder to the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor. Not one of the demonstration aircraft, this one was undergoing routine maintenance, its engine modules removed. It couldn't fly, but its cockpit systems were fully operational for testing. Go ahead, the crew chief said, gesturing to the open cockpit. Colonel says you can sit in it for a few minutes. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she lowered herself into the seat. The cockpit wrapped around her like a glove, both familiar from thousands of simulated hours and startlingly new. The control stick felt different under her fingers, more substantial, more real. The heads-up display glass was clearer than any monitor could replicate. May I? She asked, gesturing to the startup sequence. The crew chief hesitated, then nodded. Systems only. No engine start, obviously. Sophia's fingers moved across the controls with practiced precision, bringing the avionics to life. Displays illuminated, showing system status, fuel levels, weapons configuration. She ran through the pre-flight checklist from memory, each switch and button exactly where she expected it to be. "You've done this before," the crew chief observed, his initial skepticism giving way to curiosity. "Only in simulation," Sophia replied, her focus on the displays. "But I've done it thousands of times." She continued through the checklist, noting small differences between her simulator and the real aircraft. The throttle had more resistance than she expected. The seat conformed to her body differently. The environmental controls were more responsive. "Your simulator must be pretty sophisticated," the crew chief commented. "I've been building and refining it for 15 years, Sophia replied, running her fingertips reverently over the instrument panel. "But it's still just an approximation." A shadow fell across the cockpit. Sophia looked up to see Colonel Harrington standing on the maintenance platform beside the aircraft, watching her with intense focus. "How does it compare?" he asked. "Similar in layout and function, different in feel." She gestured to the controls. "The physical feedback is more nuanced. The sensory experience is richer." Harrington nodded, then turned to the crew chief. "Give us a minute." When they were alone, Harrington leaned closer to the cockpit, his voice low. "The Pentagon team is insistent on seeing a 6-aircraft demonstration. The funding for the entire program depends on it." Sophia waited, sensing there was more. "The 6th aircraft, the one with the canopy seal issue, can't fly at demonstration altitude, but it could fly a modified profile. Lower altitude, limited maneuvers." The implication hung in the air between them. Sophia's mouth went dry. "Colonel, are you suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything officially," Harrington interrupted. "I'm thinking aloud about possibilities in a crisis situation." "I'm not a military pilot," Sophia said, stating the obvious. "I don't have clearance. I don't have training. I've never experienced actual G-forces." "All true." Harrington's gaze was unwavering. "I'm simply wondering if someone with, say, 2,000 hours of simulator experience in this specific aircraft might be capable of executing basic maneuvers in a controlled environment with an experienced pilot providing real-time guidance via radio." Sophia's heart pounded so loudly she was certain Harrington could hear it. "That would be highly irregular, sir." "Yes, it would." He straightened up. "Completely hypothetical, of course." "Of course," she echoed, her mind racing. "Ms. Morgan, if such a hypothetical scenario were to occur, what would be your primary concerns?" She didn't hesitate. "G-force management, real-world turbulence response, emergency protocols if something goes wrong." Harrington nodded. "Reasonable concerns. Hypothetically speaking, if the profile were limited to 3G maximum, with no complex maneuvers and constant communication with the tower, those risks might be mitigated." "They might," she agreed carefully. "The demonstration begins in 3 hours, Harrington said, checking his watch. "I need to brief the team on our modified 5-aircraft profile." He turned to leave, then paused. "The 6th aircraft will be on the flight line, fueled and ready in case we resolve the canopy issue. Cockpit access code is 4789. He walked away, leaving Sophia alone in the cockpit, her mind reeling with possibilities and implications. She ran her hands over the controls once more, feeling the solidity of what had previously existed only in simulation for her. The choice before her was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating, a chance to finally fly, but with risks that couldn't be understated. After climbing down from the cockpit, Sophia wandered to the edge of the maintenance hangar, watching aircraft movements on the distant runway. Pilots in flight suits strode purposefully across the tarmac, preparing for the demonstration. They belonged here, she didn't. "You're really considering it, aren't you?" Sophia turned to find Grace Chun standing beside her, arms crossed. "Considering what?" Sophia asked carefully. Grace gave her a knowing look. "I overheard Harrington." "The sixth aircraft. The hypothetical scenario," Sophia sighed. "Would you believe me if I said I wasn't?" "No. I've seen your eyes when you look at those aircraft. It's the same way I looked at engines before I got my engineering degree." Grace leaned against the hangar wall. "It's crazy, you know. You could die." "I know. Or get arrested." "I know that too." Grace studied her for a long moment. "But you're still going to do it." It wasn't a question, but Sophia answered anyway. "I've spent 15 years learning every system, every procedure, every emergency protocol for an opportunity I never thought would come. If I walk away now—" "You'll regret it forever," Grace finished. She straightened up. "Well, if you're going to be insane, at least do it properly. Come with me." "Where?" "To get you a flight suit. You can't fly a multi-million-dollar stealth fighter in borrowed coveralls." An hour later, Sophia stood in a small ready room, wearing a flight suit that Grace had borrowed from the equipment storage. It fit surprisingly well, the material heavier than she'd expected. "The G-suit connections are here," Grace explained, pointing to the leg attachments. "It'll inflate automatically during high-G maneuvers to prevent blood pooling in your lower extremities." "I've studied the systems," Sophia said, "but I've never actually worn one." "Practice breathing exercises." "Now," Grace advised. "When the G-forces hit, you'll need to tighten your core and legs. Perform the hook maneuver with your breathing." Sophia nodded, rehearsing the technique she'd read about, but never implemented. Grace helped adjust the suit straps, ensuring proper fit. "Why are you helping me?" Sophia asked suddenly. Grace paused, considering the question. "Because I know what it's like to have everyone underestimate you, to have knowledge that nobody believes you possess." She tightened a final strap. "And because you fixed 2 aircraft problems that stumped our entire maintenance division. You've earned a chance." The door opened, and Major Reynolds stepped in, stopping short when he saw Sophia in a flight suit. His expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and understanding. "So it's true," he said. "Harrington's actually going through with this insanity." Sophia straightened her shoulders. "Nothing's been decided yet." Reynolds shook his head. "This is beyond irregular. It's dangerous. You've never experienced real flight conditions." "I know the risks," Sophia replied. "Do you?" Reynolds stepped closer. "Have you ever pulled 5 gigaseconds? Felt your vision narrow to a pinpoint? Fought to remain conscious while your body feels 3 times its normal weight?" "No," she admitted. "But I've studied the physiological effects and countermeasures extensively." Reynolds looked incredulous. "Studied? This isn't a test you can ace by reading the textbook, Morgan. This is real life with real consequences. I understand that." "I don't think you do." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "Look, I appreciate what you did with the aircraft. That was impressive. But there's a world of difference between fixing a plane and flying one." Before Sophia could respond, the door opened again. Colonel Harrington entered, his expression grave. "The Pentagon officials are insisting on the full 6-aircraft demonstration," he announced without preamble. Secretary Davis made it clear that anything less would be considered a failure of capability. The room fell silent. Reynolds looked at Harrington, then at Sophia. "Sir, you can't be serious about this." "About what, Major?" Harrington's tone was carefully neutral. Reynolds gestured to Sophia. "Letting a civilian with 0 flight experience pilot an F-22 during a critical demonstration." "I haven't made any such decision," Harrington replied, his gaze shifting to Sophia. "However, I am exploring all options for meeting the demonstration requirements." "This isn't an option, sir," Reynolds insisted. "It's a disaster waiting to happen." "Your concern is noted, Major." Harrington's tone made it clear the discussion was over. "Now I need to speak with Ms. Morgan privately." Reynolds hesitated, then nodded stiffly and left, with Grace following after a supportive glance at Sophia. When they were alone, Harrington's formal demeanor softened slightly. "The 6th aircraft has been moved to the flight line. The canopy seal issue means you, hypothetically speaking, would need to stay below 10,000 feet. The demonstration profile would be modified to keep you at the rear of the formation, performing only basic maneuvers." "What about authorization?" Sophia asked. "Clearance?" "I've entered a temporary civilian contractor into the flight system. For consulting purposes only, of course." His expression remained carefully neutral. "The decision remains yours. Ms. Morgan, no one would blame you for walking away." Sophia thought of her years spent in simulation, the countless hours studying manuals, the dreams that had sustained her through long shifts at the diner. Then she thought of her father, who had died pursuing his passion for flight. He had always told her that life's greatest regrets came not from the risks taken, but from the chances never seized. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I need to understand the exact profile, the communication protocols, the emergency procedures." Harrington's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did a flicker of respect, perhaps even admiration. "Then we'd better get started." The next hour passed. In a blur of briefings, Harrington outlined the demonstration profile, a series of formation flights, separated maneuvers, and a final pass over the viewing stand. Sophia would fly at the rear of the formation, executing only the most basic maneuvers, maintaining constant radio contact with Reynolds, who would talk her through each step from the lead aircraft. "You'll be calcine Sierra," Harrington explained. "Reynolds is Alpha. Follow his instructions exactly. If at any point you feel uncomfortable or lose control, say Sierra disengaging, and he'll talk you through recovery procedures." Sophia absorbed every detail, asking questions about communication frequencies, emergency protocols, and the specific handling characteristics of the aircraft she would fly. Despite the surreal nature of the situation, her mind remained clear, focused on the task ahead. "The Pentagon officials don't know about this arrangement," Harrington added. "As far as they're concerned, all pilots are qualified Air Force personnel." "And if something goes wrong?" Sophia asked. Harrington's expression grew serious. "Then I take full responsibility. My career, not yours." The gravity of what they were planning settled over them. This wasn't just about Sophia finally getting to fly, it was about careers, funding, and potentially lives if anything went wrong. "Last chance to back out," Harrington said quietly. Sophia looked through the window at the flight line where 6 F-22 Raptors sat waiting. 5 would be piloted by highly trained military aviators with thousands of hours of real flight experience. The 6th would have her a waitress with a simulator rig and dreams too big for her circumstances. "I'm in," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and right. The walk to the flight line was the longest of Sophia's life. Each step brought her closer to either fulfilling her greatest dream or making a catastrophic mistake. She felt the weight of stares from personnel, who clearly wondered who this unknown woman in a flight suit might be. At the aircraft, a crew chief waited with a helmet and oxygen mask. "You Morgan?" he asked gruffly. "Yes." He handed her the gear. "Colonel said to make sure these fit properly. Can't have them coming loose during flight." Sophia adjusted the helmet, surprised by its weight. The oxygen mask felt claustrophobic at first, but she forced herself to breathe normally, acclimating to the sensation. "You know how to strap in?" the crew chief asked. "Yes, 5-point harness, oxygen connection, G-suit connections, communication check." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Aircraft is prepped for low-altitude flight only. Stay below 10,000 feet. Weapon systems are completely disabled." "Understood." The crew chief hesitated, then added, "Whatever you're doing, fly safe." As Sophia climbed the ladder to the cockpit, she felt a momentary surge of doubt. This wasn't a simulation. There would be no reset button, no second chance if she made a mistake. The aircraft before her represented both the culmination of her dreams and the most dangerous thing she'd ever attempted. Settling into the cockpit, she began the pre-flight checklist, her movements automatic from years of practice. Each switch, each button, each display check felt simultaneously familiar and new. The engine start sequence sent vibrations through the airframe that no simulation could replicate, a living machine awakening around her. "Sierra, this is Tower. Radio check," came a voice through her helmet. "Tower, Sierra. Reading you 5 by 5, she replied, using the aviation terminology she'd practiced but never actually used in real communication. "Sierra, this is Alpha," Reynolds' voice now. "Stay on my wing, follow my lead, no improvisation, confirm." "Alpha, Sierra, confirmed." "Tower, Alpha, formation is ready for taxi." "Alpha Tower, you are cleared to taxi to runway 27, winds light and variable." Sophia watched as the 5 aircraft ahead of her began to move. She released the brakes and gently increased throttle, feeling the Raptor respond to her touch. The sensation was indescribable. 15,000 pounds of thrust at her fingertips, $43 million of advanced technology surrounding her, responding to her commands. As they approached the runway, Sophia ran through the takeoff procedures one final time. Reynolds' voice came through her helmet again. "Sierra, after takeoff, maintain 300 knots. Climb to 8,000 feet and hold formation position. On my mark, we'll begin demonstration sequence Alpha." "Alpha, Sierra. Understood." The first 5 aircraft lined up on the runway, then took off in precise 20-second intervals, their afterburners painting the sky with brief flares of intense heat. Then it was her turn. Sophia guided the F-22 into position, feeling a momentary sense of unreality. "Sierra Tower, you are cleared for takeoff." This was it. The moment 15 years of dreams, study, and simulation had led to. Sophia increased throttle, feeling the raw power of the engines pushing her back into the seat. The F-22 accelerated down the runway, gathering speed with breathtaking rapidity. "Rotate at 130 knots, Reynolds reminded her. The airspeed indicator climbed rapidly. 100, 110, 120, 130. Sophia pulled back gently on the stick, and the F-22 responded immediately, lifting off the runway with an eagerness that surprised her. The sensation of becoming airborne, of defying gravity in this magnificent machine, was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Positive rate. "Gear up," she said automatically, retracting the landing gear as the aircraft climbed into the blue New Mexico sky. "Looking good, Sierra." Reynolds' voice had lost some of its earlier skepticism. "Maintain heading 270. Continue climb to 8,000 feet. Sophia banked the aircraft gently, adjusting to the feel of actual flight. The F-22 was responsive beyond her expectations, almost intuitive in its handling. Yet she could feel subtle differences. From her simulation, the way crosswinds affected the airframe, the slight vibrations through the control stick, the G-forces pressing her into the seat during even minor maneuvers. "Sierra, reduce speed to 300 knots and move into formation position," Reynolds instructed. Pentagon officials are in place at the viewing stand. Demonstration begins in 3 minutes. Sophia throttled back and maneuvered carefully into position behind and to the right of the main formation. From this angle, the other 5 Raptors presented a perfect arrowhead shape against the desert sky. She was not part of that precision group. She was the outlier, the unknown quantity, the waitress pretending to be a pilot. "Formation, this is Alpha. Beginning demonstration sequence in 3, 2, 1, mark." The 5 lead aircraft banked sharply, left in perfect unison, performing a tight turn that would pull approximately 4 gigaseconds. Sophia followed at a safer distance, feeling the pressure increase as she executed the turn. The G-suit inflated around her legs, squeezing to prevent blood from pooling away from her brain. She performed the breathing technique Grace had reminded her about, tightening her core muscles and executing the hook maneuver with her breath. "Good job, Sierra," Reynolds said. "Stay with us for the next sequence." Straight-line acceleration followed by climbing turn. The formation straightened out, then accelerated rapidly. Sophia matched their speed, feeling the raw power of the F-22's engines. As they began the climbing turn, she followed, maintaining her position with growing confidence. The aircraft responded to her inputs with precision, almost as if it wanted to help her succeed. For the next 10 minutes, the formation executed increasingly complex maneuvers, while Sophia maintained her supporting position, performing simplified versions of each sequence. With each successful movement, her confidence grew, though she remained acutely aware of her limitations. "Final sequence approaching," Reynolds announced. "Formation split and rejoin. Sierra, you'll maintain altitude and heading while we perform the split. Once we rejoin, follow us for the final pass over the viewing stand." "Understood, Alpha." The 5 lead aircraft suddenly split apart like a firework, each taking a different vector before beginning intricate loops and rolls that would bring them back together. Sophia held her position, watching in admiration as the Air Force pilots demonstrated the full capabilities of their aircraft. As they rejoined formation, Reynolds' voice came through once more. "Sierra, you're doing well. One final pass and we're done. Stay in position and follow our lead." The 6 aircraft aligned for the final approach to the viewing stand, where the Pentagon officials would witness the culmination of the demonstration. Sophia felt a surge of pride. She was flying an F-22 Raptor, something she had dreamed about since childhood but never truly believed would happen. Then, without warning, warning lights flashed across her instrument panel. The aircraft shuddered, and the control stick suddenly became heavy in her hand. "Alpha Sierra," she called, fighting to keep her voice calm. "I'm showing multiple system warnings. Flight control response is degrading." "What warnings?" Reynolds asked sharply. "Hydraulic pressure dropping. Flight control computer showing errors." Sophia scanned the instruments, her simulator training kicking in. "The canopy seal issue may be affecting other systems. Sierra, disengage from formation. Reduce altitude and prepare for emergency procedures." Sophia began the emergency checklist, her hands moving across the controls with practiced precision despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The aircraft continued to shudder, the control stick growing increasingly unresponsive. "Alpha, Sierra, control response continuing to degrade. Request immediate landing clearance." "Tower, Alpha, we have an emergency situation with Sierra. Request priority landing, runway 27. Alpha Tower, runway 27 clear for emergency landing. Fire crews standing by." The demonstration forgotten, Sophia focused entirely on keeping the F-22 stable as she banked toward the runway. The hydraulic warnings continued to multiply, and the aircraft's handling grew increasingly sluggish. "Sierra, this is Tower. You're 5 miles from threshold. Wind 270 at 12 knots. You are cleared to land." Sophia adjusted her approach, compensating for the degraded controls. Every movement required more force, more anticipation. This was nothing like the simulator, yet everything her thousands of hours had prepared her for. "Sierra, your approach angle is too steep," Reynolds warned. "Level out and reduce descent rate." She pulled back on the stick, but the aircraft responded sluggishly. Warning tones filled her helmet as multiple systems approached critical status. The runway approached rapidly, too rapidly. "Tower, Sierra is coming in hot," someone called over the radio. Sophia's world narrowed to the instrument panel before her and the runway ahead. The F-22 wanted to roll right, She countered with left input. The nose wanted to drop. She fought to maintain a controllable glide path. Every ounce of her self-taught knowledge, every hour in the simulator, crystallized into this moment. 3 miles to threshold, tower announced. Fire crews in position. The F-22 crossed the perimeter fence at 200 knots, too fast for a normal landing. But with degraded controls, Sophia didn't dare reduce speed further until she was certain of making the runway. Gear down, she called, deploying the landing gear. The aircraft shuddered violently as the gear extended into the airstream, further destabilizing her approach. Half-mile to threshold, tower called. You're still too fast, Sierra. Sophia cut power and pitched up slightly, bleeding off speed, while fighting to keep the aircraft aligned with the runway centerline. The concrete threshold passed beneath her as she guided the struggling F-22 toward touchdown. The F-22 slammed onto the runway harder than intended, the impact jarring through Sophia's body despite the cushioning of the ejection seat. The aircraft bounced once, threatening to become airborne again, a dangerous situation with compromised controls. She pushed forward on the stick, forcing the nose down, keeping the wheels in contact with the concrete. Sierra has touchdown, tower announced. Deploy drag chute and maximum braking. Sophia deployed the drag chute, feeling the sudden deceleration as the parachute caught air. She applied brake pressure gradually, fighting the aircraft's tendency to veer right as the hydraulic system continued to deteriorate. Warning lights still flashed across her panel, but she focused solely on bringing the damaged fighter to a stop. The F-22 slowed, the drag chute billowing behind it like a flag of surrender. As the aircraft's speed dropped below 60 knots, Sophia finally allowed herself to exhale. She guided the Raptor toward the taxiway where emergency vehicles waited. With lights flashing, Sierra shut down engines and egress immediately, tower instructed. Potential hydraulic fire risk. With hands that suddenly felt shaky, Sophia executed the emergency shutdown procedure, cutting power to the engines and disabling electrical systems. The cockpit fell silent except for the hiss of her oxygen mask and the pounding of her heart. As the canopy rose, she disconnected her oxygen and communications lines, unfastened her harness, and climbed out onto the ladder that emergency personnel had positioned beside the aircraft. Everything happened so fast. Well, you're famous now. Grace held up her phone, showing the viral video. The waitress pilot who saved a $150 million aircraft. That's not exactly how I'd describe it. No. How would you describe it then? Sophia thought for a moment. The culmination of 15 years of preparation, meeting one extraordinary opportunity. Grace smiled. I like that better. She lowered her voice. For what it's worth, the maintenance crew's impressed. That landing with that level of hydraulic failure? Most pilots would have punched out, so Reynolds said. Reynolds is right, and coming from him, that's high praise. Grace checked her watch. I have to get back to the flight line. They want a complete inspection of all the Raptors now, looking for similar defects in the hydraulic pumps. After Grace left, Sophia wandered through the corridors, uncertain where to go or what to do next. The base personnel she passed looked at her differently, now some with curiosity, others with newfound respect. Word had spread quickly about what she had accomplished. She found herself in the pilot's ready room, drawn by the familiar environment she had only experienced through research and images until today. The room was empty except for Reynolds, who sat reviewing flight data on a tablet. Morgan, he acknowledged as she entered. Come to see where the real pilots hang out. Just walking, she replied, moving to leave. Wait, Reynolds sat down. The tablet. I'm looking at your flight data. Mind going through it with me? Sophia hesitated, then joined him. The screen displayed graphs and metrics from her flight airspeed, altitude, control inputs, system status. The hydraulic failure. was clearly visible as a sudden pressure drop at the 23-minute mark. Your response time was 1.8 seconds, Reynolds noted, pointing to the graph. That's faster than average for experienced pilots. In simulation, I practiced responding to failures without hesitation, Sophia explained. The first action is almost instinctive now. Reynolds nodded, swiping to another screen. Your control inputs after the failure were unusual, but effective. He traced a pattern of rudder and aileron adjustments that compensated for the hydraulic loss. Most pilots would have used more conventional recovery techniques. Conventional techniques assume balanced hydraulic degradation, Sophia said. This failure was asymmetric, more pressure loss on the right side than the left. I had to counter the imbalance. Reynolds studied her with newfound interest. Where did you learn this level of detail about F-22 hydraulic systems? I found schematics online years ago. Then I built a physics model for my simulator that would replicate various failure modes accurately. You built that yourself? Sophia nodded. I couldn't afford commercial simulation software with that level of detail. So I wrote my own. Reynolds shook his head in disbelief. And all this time, you've been serving coffee at the diner. It paid the bills while I pursued what I really loved. Their conversation was interrupted as other pilots began filtering into the ready room, each pausing momentarily upon seeing Sophia. Some nodded respectfully. Others seemed unsure how to react to her presence. Captain Martinez, the pilot with the broken wrist whose place Sophia had taken, approached directly. So you're the waitress who flew my bird, he said, extending his uninjured hand, and landed her with hydraulic failure. Impressive. Thank you, Sophia replied, shaking his hand. Though I'm sorry about the damage. Better the aircraft. Than you, Martinez said. That pump failure could have happened to anyone. The fact that you brought her back in one piece. He whistled softly. That's skill. One by one, the other pilots approached, introducing themselves, asking questions about her simulator experience, her emergency procedures, her landing technique. The initial skepticism gave way to professional curiosity and gradually acceptance. These were men and women who respected competence above all else, and Sophia had demonstrated that in the most dramatic way possible. As evening approached, Sophia found herself still on the base, uncertain of her status or whether she was free to leave. No one had explicitly detained her, but Secretary Davis's instruction to remain available seemed to imply she should stay nearby. She sat in the officers' mess, nursing a cup of coffee. Ironic, she thought, that she was drinking coffee instead of serving it for once. The television in the corner was tuned to a news channel, which was now showing the viral video of her landing. The caption read, "Civilian waitress lands damaged F-22 in miraculous save." "They're calling you the diner pilot," Harrington said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Social media has exploded with your story." "I never wanted attention," Sophia said quietly. "I just wanted to fly." "Well, you certainly accomplished that." Harrington smiled faintly. "And you saved a very expensive aircraft in the process." "What happens now?" Harrington's expression grew serious. "Secretary Davis and General Whitmore have been in meetings all afternoon. The situation is complicated. Because I shouldn't have been in that cockpit. Because you demonstrated extraordinary ability that doesn't fit neatly into the system," Harrington corrected. "The Air Force has procedures for everything. Ms. Morgan, there's no procedure for a civilian with no formal training successfully flying an emergency landing an F-22 Raptor." Before Sophia could respond, the mess hall door opened and Secretary Davis entered, accompanied by General Whitmore and several officers Sophia didn't recognize. The room fell silent as they approached her table. "Ms. Morgan," Davis said, "we've reached a decision regarding today's events." Sophia stood, steeling herself for the worst criminal charges, perhaps, or at minimum, banishment from the base, and any future connection to aviation. After reviewing the flight data, maintenance reports, and consulting with legal counsel, we've determined that your actions today, while unorthodox, resulted in the preservation of a valuable military asset, under circumstances that would have challenged even experienced pilots. Sophia blinked, uncertain where this was heading. Furthermore, Davis continued, your technical expertise in identifying and resolving critical aircraft issues demonstrates an exceptional understanding of complex systems. He glanced at Whitmore, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Therefore, we are offering you a position as a civilian technical consultant to the Air Force, with specific focus on emergency flight procedures and system troubleshooting. The words took a moment to register. A position? With appropriate security clearance and access to facilities commensurate with your responsibilities, Davis confirmed. This would include simulator time to further develop and test emergency procedures. Sophia struggled to process this unexpected turn. I don't understand. I thought I'd be facing charges for unauthorized flight. Officially, you were acting under Colonel Harrington's authority in an emergency situation, Whitmore explained. While his decision to place you in that cockpit was irregular, the outcome justifies a creative interpretation of the regulations. And unofficially? Sophia asked. Davis almost smiled. Unofficially, your story has captured the public's imagination. The waitress with self-taught expertise who saved an F-22 when everything failed. It's the kind of narrative that resonates with people determination, preparation, rising to the challenge. What Secretary Davis means, Harrington interjected gently, is that you've become too valuable an asset and too popular a figure to punish. There's one more thing, Davis added. Given your demonstrated aptitude, we're prepared to offer you the opportunity to apply for the Air Force's officer training program, with a path to becoming a test pilot if you qualify. Sophia felt her knees weaken. A test pilot? Your background is unconventional, Whitmore acknowledged, but your performance today suggests you have the inherent skills and knowledge. With proper training, you could become an exceptional pilot. It was more than Sophia had ever dared to dream, not just acceptance of her self-taught knowledge, but validation, opportunity, a path to turn her lifelong passion into a career. From serving coffee to military pilots to potentially becoming one herself. I don't know what to say, she managed finally. Say yes, Reynolds called from across the room, where he and the other pilots had been listening intently. We could use someone who can land a Raptor with no hydraulics. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The pilots who had dismissed her that morning were now advocating for her inclusion in their ranks. Ms. Morgan? Davis prompted. What's your answer? Sophia thought of her apartment simulator, the manuals hidden under her bed, the years spent studying systems most people didn't even know existed. She thought of her father, who had told her that the sky belonged to those brave enough to claim it. She thought of the brief, exhilarating moments when the F-22 had responded to her touch, making real what had previously existed only in simulation and dreams. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. I accept. Davis nodded, satisfied. Good. Report to Colonel Harrington tomorrow morning to begin processing your paperwork and security clearance application. He extended his hand. Welcome aboard, Ms. Morgan. As the officials departed, the pilots surrounded Sophia, offering congratulations and good-natured warnings about the rigors of officer training. Her legs trembled as they touched the ground, partly from adrenaline, partly from the residual effects of G-forces her body had never experienced before. Fire crews surrounded the F-22, spraying foam beneath the aircraft where hydraulic fluid had leaked onto the hot brakes. Sophia was guided away from the scene by a flight line technician, who kept looking at her with an expression of disbelief. Are you injured? He asked. She shook her head, unable to find her voice just yet. The reality of what she had just accomplished and how close she had come to disaster was beginning to sink in. In the distance, she could see the other 5 F-22s landing in sequence, their demonstration cut short by her emergency. Colonel Harrington was striding across the tarmac toward her, his face unreadable. Behind him, the Pentagon officials followed, their expressions ranging from confusion to outrage. This was it, Sophia thought. The moment when she would face the consequences of her actions. She had flown a military aircraft without authorization, potentially endangered lives, definitely risked a multi-million-dollar fighter jet. No matter that she had been tacitly authorized by Harrington officially, this was a serious breach of protocol, possibly even law. She straightened her shoulders and removed her helmet, ready to face whatever came next. What the hell just happened? Secretary Davis demanded as the group reached her. Who is this woman, and why was she flying one of my aircraft? Ms. Morgan is a civilian consultant who assisted with emergency aircraft repairs, Harrington replied smoothly. When Captain Martinez was injured, we faced a critical decision point for the demonstration. So you put an unqualified civilian in F-22? General Whitmore looked incredulous. Do you have any idea how many regulations you violated, Colonel? Before Harrington could respond, a maintenance vehicle skidded to a halt nearby. Grace. Shun jumped out, followed by several technicians. She ran to the F-22, ducking beneath the airframe to examine the hydraulic system. Colonel, she called after a moment, you need to see this. Harrington excused himself and moved to join Grace under the aircraft. They conferred briefly, then both approached the group, Grace carrying what appeared to be a damaged component. Sir, she addressed Secretary Davis directly, this is the secondary hydraulic pump. It suffered a catastrophic failure during flight. She held up the part, pointing to a fracture along one side. This wasn't caused by the canopy seal issue. This is a manufacturing defect. What are you saying? Davis asked. I'm saying this aircraft would have experienced this failure regardless of who was flying it, Grace explained. And frankly, sir, the fact that it's on the ground in one piece is nothing short of miraculous given the extent of the damage. All eyes turned to Sophia, who stood silently, still processing the reality of her emergency landing. Ms. Morgan managed to land this aircraft with critical hydraulic failure and degraded flight controls, Harrington added. A feat that would challenge even our most experienced pilots. Reynolds, who had joined the group after landing his own aircraft, nodded grudgingly. The landing approach was textbook emergency procedure. Given the system failures, I'm not sure I could have done better myself. Secretary Davis looked from the damaged part to Sophia and back again. I'm still not clear on why a civilian was flying this aircraft in the first place. Colonel Harrington, I expect a full explanation. Yes, sir. Perhaps we should continue this discussion inside, Harrington suggested, gesturing toward the operations building. As the officials moved away, Reynolds lingered behind. He studied Sophia with newfound respect. Where did you learn to handle hydraulic failure like that? I crashed hundreds of times in my simulator, Sophia replied, her voice steadier than she expected. I programmed every possible failure scenario and practiced until I could recover from each one. You never crashed in simulation with this specific failure? I crashed the first 50 times, she admitted. Then I developed a technique for compensating with opposite rudder input while maintaining a higher approach speed to preserve control. Authority. Reynolds shook his head, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You know, most of our pilots would have ejected in that situation. Ejection was my backup plan, Sophia said. But I figured the aircraft could be repaired. My pride couldn't. A laugh escaped Reynolds, a sound of genuine amusement and respect. Morgan, you're either the craziest or the most talented civilian I've ever met. Possibly both. He extended his hand. That was one hell of a landing. Inside the operations building, Sophia found herself seated in a conference room, facing what amounted to an impromptu inquiry. Secretary Davis, General Whitmore, Colonel Harrington, and several other officers sat across the table, their expressions ranging from stern to curious. "Let me be clear," Davis began. "Regardless of the outcome, placing an untrained civilian in control of an F-22 Raptor represents a serious breach of protocol and potentially federal law." "With respect, sir," Harrington interjected, "the decision was mine alone. Ms. Morgan was acting under my direct orders in an emergency situation. An emergency you created by attempting to field 6 aircraft when you only had 5 qualified pilots," Whitmore pointed out. "Yes, sir." Harrington didn't flinch. "I take full responsibility for that decision." Sophia listened to them discuss her fate as if she weren't present. Her thoughts drifted to the moment the F-22 had lifted off, that perfect instant when dreams and reality had merged, when the years of simulation and study had manifested in actual flight. Whatever happened next, they couldn't take that away from her. "Miss Morgan," Davis addressed her directly, pulling her back to the present. "What possessed you to agree to this arrangement?" All eyes turned to her. Sophia considered her answer carefully, knowing it might determine not just her future but Harrington's career as well. "Sir, I've spent 15 years studying aviation systems, flight dynamics, and emergency procedures. I've logged over 5,000 hours in advanced flight simulators that I built myself." She met his gaze steadily. "When Colonel Harrington presented the situation, I assessed the risks and determined that I could safely execute the limited profile required for the demonstration. And when the aircraft experienced failure," Whitmore pressed, "I followed emergency protocols exactly as established in Air Force procedure manuals. The same protocols I've practiced hundreds of times in simulation." The room fell silent as the officials exchanged glances. Finally, Davis leaned forward. "Ms. Morgan, your background checks out. Colonel Harrington provided your file while you were being examined by medical personnel. Self-taught expertise, no formal training, yet you managed to land a malfunctioning F-22 when many trained pilots might have ejected." He shook his head. "It's unprecedented." "Sir," Harrington spoke up, "I would like to point out that Ms. Morgan identified and resolved 2 critical aircraft issues earlier today, enabling 5 of our 6 demonstration aircraft to fly. Her technical knowledge is exceptional." Davis nodded slowly. "So I've been told. The question remains, what are we going to do about this situation?" Before anyone could respond, there was a knock at the door. A lieutenant entered with a tablet, which he handed to General Whitmore. The general read the screen, his eyebrows rising steadily. "Well," he said finally, "this complicates matters." "What is it?" Davis asked. "Video of Ms. Morgan's emergency landing has already gone viral. Someone on the flight line recorded it and posted it online with the caption, 'Waitress lands damaged F-22 when everything failed.'" He turned the tablet so others could see. "It has over 100,000 views in the last hour." Sophia felt her stomach drop. Public exposure was the last thing she had expected or wanted. "There's more," Whitmore continued. "News organizations are requesting comment. Apparently, someone leaked the backstory civilian with no formal training. Self-taught expertise, emergency landing with hydraulic failure." Davis pinched the bridge of his nose. "This is becoming a media circus." "Sir," Harrington said carefully, "perhaps we could view this as an opportunity rather than a problem." "An opportunity? How exactly is this unauthorized flight and subsequent media leak an opportunity, Colonel?" "The public response appears overwhelmingly positive. A civilian woman with extraordinary self-taught skills steps up in a crisis and safely lands a damaged aircraft that might otherwise have been lost." Harrington gestured to the tablet, where comments were visible beneath the video. "People are inspired by her story." Davis considered this, then turned to Sophia. "Ms. Morgan, regardless of the public reaction, there remain serious questions about today's events. I'm going to need time to consult with my team about the appropriate response. I understand, sir. In the meantime, he continued, you are not to speak to the media or make any public statements about what occurred today. Is that clear? Yes, sir. You're dismissed for now. Please remain available should we have further questions. Sophia stood, nodded respectfully to the officials, and left the room. In the corridor outside, she leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline finally drained from her system. She had flown an F-22 Raptor. She had faced a critical system failure and landed safely. And now, apparently she had become an internet sensation. Hey, Grace appeared beside her. You okay? I'm not sure, Sophia admitted. Sometimes they come from ordinary people who refuse to accept the limitations others place upon them, who prepare relentlessly for opportunities that may never come, and who rise to the occasion when everything fails and only they know how to respond. From waitress to pilot, from serving coffee to soaring through the clouds, Sophia Morgan had transformed her life not through luck or shortcuts, but through the quiet power of preparation meeting its perfect moment. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone who heard her story that the most unlikely heroes are often hiding in plain sight, just waiting for their moment to fly. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us. Unlike her emergency flight in the F-22, this ascent was controlled, deliberate, the beginning of a properly structured training program rather than a crisis response. As they climbed through 5,000 feet, Sophia noticed a small gathering on one of the observation platforms near the runway. Even from a distance, she recognized Manny's stocky figure, watching her first official flight just as he'd promised. Request permission to execute a wing wave, she asked Reynolds. For your diner. Owner? Reynolds asked knowingly. Granted. Show him what his waitress can do now. Sophia banked the aircraft gently, dipping the wing in a traditional aviator's salute as they passed the observation platform. Far below, she could see Manny waving enthusiastically. Smooth, Reynolds commented. Your stick and rudder skills are impressive for someone without formal training. I had good teachers, Sophia replied. They just happened to be books, manuals, and simulation software instead of flight instructors. Well, now you have both, Reynolds said. Let's see what you can do with proper training to build on that foundation. For the next hour, Sophia put the T-38 through its paces, performing basic maneuvers under Reynolds' guidance. Her self-taught skills translated remarkably well to the actual aircraft, requiring only minor adjustments and corrections. You're unnatural, Reynolds commented as she executed a perfect barrel roll. But I'm beginning to think that's because you prepared so thoroughly, not because of some innate talent. Probably both, Sophia admitted. I've always understood aircraft intuitively, but the thousands of hours in simulation definitely helped. As they returned to base, Reynolds took control for the landing demonstration. Watch carefully. Next. Flight, you'll be doing this part. Sophia observed his technique, noting the subtle differences from her emergency landing in the F-22. Without hydraulic failure in crisis conditions, the approach was more measured, more precise as skill. To be mastered rather than a disaster to be survived. After landing, they were met by Colonel Harrington and Dr. Reeves, both looking pleased with her progress. Excellent first flight, Harrington said. How did it feel compared to the simulator? More vivid, Sophia replied honestly. The physical sensations, the subtle feedback through the controls, it's like comparing a photograph to real life. "Your adaptability is remarkable," Reeves observed. "Most simulator pilots struggle with the transition to actual aircraft." "I've been visualizing real flight for 15 years, Sophia explained. "Imagining the sensations, the responses, the differences from simulation. In some ways, I've been mentally flying long before I ever touched an actual aircraft." That evening, Sophia sat in the officers' club, surrounded by pilots who had once dismissed her as just a waitress, but now welcomed her as a colleague in training. The conversation flowed easily around topics of aviation, aircraft systems, and flight experiences. "So, diner pilot," Martinez asked, using her new call sign, "what's it like going from pouring coffee to breaking records in the simulator?" "Surreal," Sophia admitted. "A month ago, I was memorizing your coffee preferences. Now I'm memorizing emergency procedures for the T-38. You're still serving, though," Reynolds pointed out. "Just in a different capacity," Grace raised her glass. To Sophia Morgan, who reminded us all that extraordinary talent can be found in ordinary places if we're willing to look. As glasses clinked around the table, Sophia felt a profound sense of belonging. The path ahead remained challenging: officer training, flight school, countless evaluations and tests, but for the first time in her life, her passion and her profession were aligned. The years of solitary study, of simulators, in a tiny apartment, of being dismissed and overlooked, had led to this moment of recognition and opportunity. 6 months later, Sophia stood on the flight line once more, this time in full Air Force uniform with second lieutenant bars on her shoulders. Before her sat an F-22 Raptor, not the one she had emergency landed, but one assigned to her for a special demonstration flight. Lieutenant Morgan, Colonel Harrington approached, accompanied by Secretary Davis and a group of visiting officials. "Are you ready to show our guests what the diner pilot can do with proper training?" "Yes, sir," Sophia replied confidently. In the months since her emergency landing, she had progressed through an accelerated training program, her self-taught foundation allowing her to advance more rapidly than traditional cadets. Her unique perspective on aircraft systems had also proved valuable to Dr. Reeves' research team, where she spent part of each week contributing to next-generation emergency response protocols. "The officials are particularly interested in your handling of simulated failures," Harrington explained. "Dr. Reeves has incorporated some of your techniques into the new autonomous recovery systems." "Glad to be useful, sir," Sophia said, checking her flight plan one last time. As she climbed into the cockpit, she caught sight of Manny in the VIP viewing area, proudly wearing an Air Force cap with "Diner Pilot" embroidered across the front. Beside him stood Grace, now a close friend and staunch advocate for Sophia within the Air Force engineering community. The F-22 systems came to life around her, familiar yet always awe-inspiring. This time, however, there was no emergency, no crisis, just the culmination of a journey from self-taught enthusiast to qualified military pilot. "Tower, Raptor 03, ready for demonstration flight," she radioed. "Raptor 03, you are cleared for takeoff. Wind 270 at 8 knots. Sophia advanced the throttle, feeling the powerful thrust push her back into the seat as the F-22 accelerated down the runway. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, responding to her touch with the precision she had dreamed of for 15 years. As she climbed into the clear blue sky, banking into her first demonstration maneuver, Sophia reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought her here. From a waitress with a hidden passion to a pilot with a recognized gift, her journey had been defined not by the opinions of others, but by her own unwavering determination to prepare for an opportunity she could never have predicted. She executed a perfect barrel roll, the world spinning around her as the F-22 demonstrated its remarkable agility. Through her helmet, she could hear the appreciative comments from the control tower as officials watched her performance. "Textbook perfect, diner pilot," Reynolds' voice came through her headset. "Now show them what you can really do." Sophia smiled beneath her oxygen mask and pushed the F-22 into a vertical climb, the blue sky darkening above her as she ascended rapidly through 20,000 feet. Unlike her emergency flight, this aircraft was in perfect condition, its systems functioning flawlessly, allowing her to experience the full capabilities of this extraordinary machine. At 30,000 feet, she rolled inverted, then pulled through. A diving turn that showcased both the aircraft's performance and her growing skill as a pilot. The G-forces pressed her into the seat, but she had trained for this now, her body conditioned to withstand the physical demands of high-performance flight. Raptor 03, proceed with simulated emergency sequence, the tower instructed. Roger, tower, beginning emergency simulation. For the next 10 minutes, Sophia demonstrated the emergency recovery techniques she had helped develop, procedures now being incorporated into pilot training programs and autonomous systems across the Air Force. The officials watched in fascination as she executed maneuvers that would save aircraft and lives in real emergency situations. As she returned for landing, Sophia felt a profound sense of completeness. The circular journey from studying pilots at the diner to becoming one herself, from serving coffee to serving her country, represented not just personal triumph, but a testament to the power of preparation meeting opportunity. The F-22 touched down smoothly, its wheels making gentle contact with the runway, a stark contrast to her emergency landing 6 months earlier. As she taxied to the designated area, she could see the officials applauding, Manny beaming with pride, and her fellow pilots offering thumbs-up gestures of approval. After shutdown procedures, Sophia climbed down from the cockpit to find Secretary Davis waiting with Colonel Harrington. "Exceptional demonstration, Lieutenant Morgan," Davis said warmly. "Your story continues to inspire people across the country. Applications to our aviation programs have increased 30% since your story went public, particularly among young women." "I'm honored to hear that, sir," Sophia replied sincerely. "What's next for the diner pilot?" A reporter called from the press section. Sophia smiled, looking toward the sky she had claimed through years of dedication and one extraordinary moment of opportunity. "Next is continuing to learn, to grow, and to prepare," she answered. "Because you never know when everything might fail, and you'll be the only one ready to respond." As cameras flashed around her, Sophia caught Manny's eye in the crowd. He gave her a knowing nod, the same nod he'd given her years ago when he'd discovered her secret simulator, when he'd been the only one who believed her knowledge might someday matter. Sophia had proven that extraordinary achievements don't always come from extraordinary beginnings. "You'll see." After lunch, Sophia was escorted to a restricted area of the base she hadn't seen before. A security officer checked her newly issued temporary credentials, then led her through a series of corridors to a large windowless room. Inside was a full-scale F-22 simulator, not a training mock-up, but an actual tactical simulator used by Air Force pilots for mission rehearsal. "Ms. Morgan," a voice called. Reynolds approached from a control station at the side of the room. "Welcome to your evaluation." "Evaluation?" Sophia echoed, suddenly nervous. "Standard procedure," he explained. "We need to formally assess your skills in a controlled environment." His expression softened slightly. "Don't worry. After what you did yesterday, this is mostly a formality." For the next 3 hours, Sophia flew simulated missions under Reynolds' direction. Starting with basic maneuvers, they progressively increased in difficulty to include complex tactical scenarios, emergency procedures, and system failures. The simulator was more sophisticated than her homemade rig, but the fundamentals were the same, and her thousands of hours of practice translated remarkably well. "Impressive," Reynolds said as she successfully completed a particularly challenging emergency scenario. "Your technique is unconventional, but effective." "I taught myself by studying manuals and forums," Sophia explained. "Without formal instruction, I probably developed some non-standard approaches." "Sometimes non-standard is exactly what's needed," Reynolds replied, "especially when standard procedures aren't working." By the end of the session, a small crowd had gathered in the control room, watching Sophia's performance with professional interest. Colonel Harrington stood among them, alongside several senior pilots and flight instructors. "Final scenario," Reynolds announced. "Multiple system failure during combat maneuvers. This is an advanced evaluation normally reserved for experienced pilots." Sophia nodded, feeling a familiar calm settle over her as the simulation began. The virtual F-22 responded to her touch as she executed a series of combat maneuvers against simulated adversaries. Without warning, cascading failures began to affect flight controls, weapon systems, and sensors, a worse scenario than her actual emergency the previous day. She processed each failure methodically, prioritizing aircraft stability and energy management while continuing to evade the simulated threats. Her hands moved with practiced confidence across the controls, making adjustments that kept the increasingly compromised aircraft responsive. When the simulation finally ended, the control room erupted in applause. Sophia blinked, momentarily disoriented as she transitioned back to reality. "That," Reynolds said with undisguised admiration, "was something special. You just set a new record for that particular scenario." "I crashed that exact scenario hundreds of times in my simulator," Sophia admitted. "I learned through failure." "The best pilots always do," Harrington said, approaching from the control room. "Congratulations, Ms. Morgan. You've passed your evaluation with flying colors." A flight instructor beside him nodded in agreement. "I've never seen someone without formal training handle multiple cascading failures so effectively." "Your instincts are remarkable. What happens next?" Sophia asked. "Next," Harrington replied, "we continue your integration process. Security, clearance, medical evaluation, academic assessment. There's still a long road ahead, but after today's performance, I'm confident you'll navigate it successfully." As they exited the simulator room, Harrington pulled Sophia aside. "There's someone who wants to meet you." He led her to a small conference room where an older man in civilian clothing waited. Despite his lack of uniform, his bearing immediately suggested military background. "Ms. Morgan, this is Dr. Alan Reeves, Director of our Advanced Flight Systems Research Division." Dr. Reeves extended his hand. "A pleasure to meet the woman who's caused such a stir in our community." Dr. Reeves oversees development of next-generation aircraft systems, Harrington explained, including emergency response protocols for autonomous flight controls. "I've reviewed your landing data," Reeves said, "and I'm particularly interested in how you managed the asymmetric hydraulic failure. Your compensation technique was unorthodox." "I developed it through trial and error in simulation," Sophia explained. "The standard procedure assumes balance degradation, but I found that asymmetric failures require different handling." "Precisely," Reeves nodded approvingly. "We've been working on similar protocols for autonomous recovery systems, but your approach introduces variables we hadn't considered." He spread several technical diagrams on the table. "Advanced flight control systems, unlike anything Sophia had seen before. We'd like to incorporate your experience into our research," Reeves continued. "Part of your consultant role would involve working with my team to develop more robust emergency response systems." Sophia studied the diagrams with growing excitement. "These are neural network-based control systems, aren't they? Adaptive response to catastrophic failures." Reeves raised an eyebrow. "You recognize the architecture?" "I experimented with similar concepts in my simulator," she admitted, "though much more primitive versions. The potential for dynamic adaptation to unforeseen failure modes is fascinating." "Remarkable," Reeves murmured, glancing at Harrington. "She really is as good as you claimed." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sophia met with medical staff for preliminary evaluations, completed more security clearance paperwork, and was issued temporary quarters on base until more permanent arrangements could be made. By evening, exhaustion began to overtake her excitement. She sat alone in the small but comfortable room she'd been assigned, trying to process the dramatic changes the last 36 hours had brought to her life. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Grace stood outside, holding a small package. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing Sophia the box. "Consider it a welcome gift." Inside was a name patch for a flight suit, reading Morgan, with Diner Pilot embroidered beneath it in smaller letters. Sophia laughed. "Is this official?" "Not exactly," Grace admitted with a grin. "But the maintenance crew had it made. They think you've earned a call sign." "Diner Pilot," Sophia repeated, running her fingers over the embroidery. "I like it. Reminds me where I came from." "That's important," Grace said, leaning against the doorframe. "Never forgetting your origins keeps you grounded, even when you're soaring." The next morning brought Sophia's first official press conference. Dressed in a conservative suit provided by the Air Force Public Affairs Office, she faced a room full of reporters, cameras, and bright lights. Colonel Harrington stood beside her at the podium, fielding the more technical questions while allowing Sophia to tell her story in her own words. "Ms. Morgan, how does someone go from serving coffee to landing an F-22 Raptor?" one reporter asked. "One day at a time," Sophia replied honestly. 15 years of study, simulation, and preparation, all for a moment I never really expected to come. "Were you afraid when the systems began to fail?" "There wasn't time for fear," she explained. "Just assessment, decision, and action. The same process I'd practiced thousands of times in simulation." What would you say to young people, especially young women, who dream of careers in aviation but face obstacles or discouragement? Sophia considered the question carefully. "I'd say that preparation meets opportunity in unexpected ways. The years I spent studying aircraft systems weren't wasted, even when it seemed like my dreams were out of reach. Knowledge accumulates, skills develop, and when the moment comes, if you've prepared yourself, you'll be ready to seize it." After the press conference, Sophia's schedule continued at a relentless pace. Physical fitness assessments, cognitive evaluations, simulator sessions, meetings with various department heads who wanted to understand how her self-taught knowledge might contribute to their programs. 3 weeks after her emergency landing, Sophia stood on the flight line once more, this time wearing a proper flight suit with her Diner Pilot patch prominently displayed. Before her sat a T-38 Talon training jet, not an F-22, but a crucial step in her formal pilot training. "Ready for your first official flight?" Reynolds asked, approaching in his own flight suit. As her assigned instructor pilot, he would oversee her transition from self-taught simulator expert to qualified military aviator. "More than ready," Sophia replied, unable to contain her excitement. "Remember, this isn't an emergency situation," Reynolds cautioned with a smile. "No need to show off with any dramatic landings." "I'll try to keep it boring," she promised. The T-38 was smaller and simpler than the F-22, but no less thrilling as Sophia settled into the cockpit. This time, every step was official, authorized, and planned. The pre-flight checklist, the engine start sequence, the taxi to the runway, all executed under Reynolds' watchful guidance from the rear seat. "Tower, Talon 27, ready for takeoff," Reynolds radioed. "Talon 27, you are cleared for takeoff. Runway 27. Your aircraft," Reynolds told Sophia. "My aircraft," she confirmed, advancing the throttle. The T-38 accelerated down the runway, lifting off with graceful precision as Sophia pulled back on the stick. The same men who had barely acknowledged her existence that morning now treated her as a colleague, their respect earned through demonstrated skill rather than credentials. So, Martinez said, raising his water glass in a mock toast, from coffee to cockpit, not bad for a day's work. I still can't believe it's real, Sophia admitted. It's real, Reynolds assured her, and well-deserved. He hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I was wrong about you. I thought book knowledge and simulation couldn't translate to real flying. You proved otherwise. I got lucky, Sophia said. The right opportunity at the right moment. Luck favors the prepared, Grace called, entering the mess hall with several maintenance technicians. And you've been preparing for 15 years. As the evening progressed, Sophia found herself at the center of an impromptu celebration. Pilots shared stories of their own close calls. Mechanics described bizarre malfunctions they'd encountered. And everyone wanted to hear about her homemade simulator and self-education journey. For the first time in her life, Sophia felt truly seen, not as a waitress, not as someone to be dismissed or overlooked, but as a person whose knowledge and abilities had value. The path ahead would be challenging, requiring formal training to complement her self-taught expertise, but she had already overcome the greatest obstacle, being given the chance to prove herself. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Harrington approached her once more. There's something you should know, he said quietly. The hydraulic pump failure wasn't the only issue with that aircraft. The canopy seal problem was real. At higher altitudes, you would have faced decompression. You knew that when you let me fly it, Sophia realized. Harrington nodded. It was a calculated risk. The demonstration profile kept you below the altitude where it would become dangerous. Why tell me this now? Because you should understand that your success today wasn't just luck or innate talent. It was the result of meticulous preparation meeting opportunity. He looked at her intently. Never forget that preparation is what saved you when systems failed. Sophia nodded, understanding the deeper lesson. Her years of study, of simulation, of practicing emergency procedures that might never be needed, that dedication had made the difference between disaster and triumph when the critical moment arrived. I won't forget, she promised. As Sophia left the base that night temporarily, now that she would be returning as a consultant rather than a waitress, she gazed up at the star-filled New Mexico sky, thinking about the journey that had brought her here and the new path stretching before her. For 15 years, she had prepared for an opportunity that seemed impossibly distant, maintaining faith in her abilities even when no one else recognized them. Today, that preparation had intersected with chance in a way that had changed everything. Tomorrow she would return to the Desert Skies diner one last time, not to serve coffee, but to say goodbye to Manny and the regular customers who had never suspected that the quiet waitress, refilling their cups, had been studying their aircraft with the intensity of someone who belonged in the sky. And then she would begin a new chapter, one where her knowledge was valued, her abilities recognized, her passion given room to soar. From the waitress everyone overlooked to the pilot who had accomplished the impossible, Sophia Morgan had finally found her place. Not through luck or shortcuts, but through years of silent preparation for a moment no one could have predicted. The moment when everything failed, and she alone was ready. The Desert Skies diner buzzed with unprecedented activity. The next morning, news vans lined the parking lot, reporters clutched microphones, and curious onlookers pressed against the windows, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the waitress who had landed an F-22 Raptor. Sophia slipped in through the back entrance, finding Manny in the kitchen, frantically preparing breakfast orders. "There you are," he exclaimed, wiping his hands on his apron. "You're all over the news, and these vultures have been here since dawn. I've been telling them you don't work mornings." Sophia smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry about the chaos, Manny." "Sorry? Are you kidding?" Manny's weathered face broke into a wide grin. "My diner is famous now. Home of the diner pilot. I'm having signs made." He pulled her into a quick hug, then held her at arm's length, studying her face. I always knew you were meant for more than refilling coffee cups. From the first time I saw that simulator in your apartment, I thought, this girl has wings waiting to unfold. I couldn't have done it without you, Sophia said sincerely. You were the only one who ever believed in me. Nah, Manny shook his head. I just recognized what was already there. You believed in yourself when nobody else did. That's the harder part. A commotion from the dining area drew their attention. Through the service window, Sophia could see reporters interviewing regular customers, most of whom were embellishing their connections to her with wild exaggeration. Oh sure, I knew she was special, one truck driver was saying. Always talking about aerodynamics while she poured my coffee. Sophia suppressed a laugh. The man had never spoken more than 3 words to her in 2 years of service. I came to tell you I won't be working here anymore, she told Manny. The Air Force offered me a position as a technical consultant, with a path to becoming a test pilot. Manny's eyes widened. A test pilot? My God, Sophia, that's incredible. It feels surreal, she admitted. Yesterday morning I was serving coffee. Today I'm preparing for a security clearance review. Life changes in an instant sometimes. Manny squeezed her shoulder. But only if you're ready when the moment comes. The kitchen door swung open and Grace entered, dressed in her Air Force uniform. Sorry to interrupt, but we need to get moving, Sophia. Colonel Harrington's waiting, and there's a lot to process today. Manny glanced between them. You two know each other? We met yesterday during the incident, Grace explained. I'm helping Sophia navigate her transition to the Air Force. Well, take care of her, Manny said protectively. She's special. We know, Grace replied with a smile. That's why we're not letting her get away. Sophia hugged Manny once. More, I'll come back to visit. And when I get my first official flight assignment, you'll be there to see it. I'm counting on it, Manny said, his voice thick with emotion. Now go show them what you can really do when you've got the right equipment. Avoiding the media crowd at the front, Sophia and Grace slipped out the back door to a waiting Air Force vehicle. As they drove toward the base, Sophia watched the familiar landscape of her daily life pass by, already feeling distant from the routine that had defined her existence for so many years. Nervous? Grace asked, glancing at her. Terrified, Sophia admitted. What if yesterday was a fluke? What if I can't live up to their expectations? Yesterday wasn't a fluke. The hydraulic failure was real. Your response was real. Grace navigated a turn. And from what I've seen, exceeding expectations is kind of your specialty. At the base, they were met by an Air Force public affairs officer who escorted them to a conference room where Colonel Harrington waited with several staff members. Ms. Morgan, Harrington greeted her. Ready for your new beginning? As ready as I'll ever be, sir. Good. First order of business, handling the media interest. He gestured to the public affairs officer. Lieutenant Collins will brief you on the approved talking points for any interviews. The secretary has authorized limited media engagement, carefully controlled, of course. Lieutenant Collins handed Sophia a folder. We've scheduled a brief press conference for tomorrow. Nothing too detailed about the technical aspects of the flight or the aircraft systems, but enough to satisfy public curiosity about your background and how you managed to land the F-22. We want to use your story to highlight the importance of STEM education and aviation careers, Harrington added, particularly for young women who might not see themselves in these roles. Sophia nodded, feeling the weight of a new kind of responsibility. I understand. Next, Harrington continued, your security clearance application. Normally this process takes months, but given the circumstances, we've been authorized to expedite it. You'll meet with security personnel this afternoon. The morning passed in a blur of paperwork, briefings, and introductions to key personnel. By noon, Sophia had signed more documents than she had in her entire life prior, had her fingerprints taken twice, and sat for a preliminary security interview that probed every aspect of her background. "It's overwhelming," she confessed to Grace over a quick lunch in the officers' mess. "That's the military for you," Grace replied. "Hurry up and wait," punctuated by mountains of paperwork. "I keep expecting someone to stop me and say there's been a mistake, that they've reconsidered letting a waitress with a homemade simulator join their ranks." Grace shook her head. "That's not going to happen. Do you know what they're calling you in the maintenance division? The natural. Reynolds has been showing everyone the flight data from your landing. He says your instinctive corrections, too. The hydraulic failure were textbook perfect." "It doesn't feel real yet," Sophia admitted. "It will," Grace assured her. "Especially this afternoon." "What's happening this afternoon?" Grace smiled mysteriously.